Sarah had no medals on her chest, no loud voice, and no stories to tell around the fire. She was not a commander or a fighter, just the woman who quietly sat behind the wheel of the army ambulance every single day. To the soldiers, she was simply Driver Sarah, the one who came fast when they called. She didn't talk much, but she always showed up. When the bullets were flying, when the bombs had just dropped, when the sand was soaked red, that's when Sarah came, driving straight into danger like she was delivering groceries, not pulling people back from death. People noticed her hands first, calm and steady, even under fire. While others screamed or froze, Sarah turned the steering wheel gently and pressed the brakes softly. Her hands never shook, not when a soldier cried in the back, not even when the explosions made the ground jump. It was as if her heartbeat stayed still, like she had ice in her veins. But no one knew the truth. Her calm came from pain, not peace. Sarah had joined the army not to fight, but to escape. Back home, everything had fallen apart. Her brother had died during a combat drill. Her mother had stopped speaking, and her father blamed her for joining. So she left, hoping the desert heat would burn away the memories. She never talked about her past, and no one asked. That's how she liked it. Drive, save, repeat. Each day was the same. She'd check the ambulance, load supplies, and wait for the radio to crackle. Wounded near Outpost 4, it would say, and Sarah would start the engine. She wasn't allowed to carry weapons, just stretchers and bandages, and that was fine with her because she didn't want to hurt anyone, only help. Soldiers often joked around her. She's just the driver, they'd say, smiling. Never seen her panic, another would add. Sarah would nod and keep her eyes on the road. She didn't care about being noticed, only about getting people home alive, but the others didn't understand what it cost her. Every time she picked up someone broken, she saw her brother's face. Every scream reminded her of the day the army car came to her door with the news. She swallowed it all, driving through dust and tears, because if she stopped, the grief would eat her alive. That morning, the sun was cruel, burning through her uniform as she checked the oil. A call came through. 2 wounded soldiers trapped near a place called Black Alley. It was supposed to be safe, just a pickup. The road had been cleared 2 hours ago, and there was no sign of enemy movement. She nodded to the base officer and got in the driver's seat. The ride was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no voices, not even the sound of wind. Sarah's eyes scanned the horizon, flat land, broken rocks, a few burnt trees. She kept one hand on the wheel, the other near the radio. Something in her stomach turned cold. Then it happened. A loud roar filled the air and a rocket slammed into the road ahead. Her ambulance lifted off the ground and flipped, metal screaming as it rolled. Her head hit the side window, and everything turned white. When she opened her eyes, smoke was pouring in and pain pulsed through her arm. She was still breathing, barely. The windshield was cracked, the dashboard crushed, and the radio silent. She reached for her seatbelt, but it was jammed. With all her strength, she kicked the door open and crawled out. That's when she saw them. 5 armed men walking slowly toward the wreck. They weren't friendly and they weren't rescuers. Her ambulance had rolled into enemy hands. Sarah's heart pounded, not with fear, but with something else. A fire, sharp and deep, something she had buried long ago. She looked around. No weapon, no help, just her body and her will. Far behind the rocks, she spotted the 2 injured soldiers, crawling, trying to hide. And in that moment, Sarah knew. No one was coming to save them. If she wanted them to live, she had to fight. And she was not just a driver anymore. The heat was rising like steam from the earth as Sarah crawled out of the broken ambulance. Dust filled her mouth, her uniform was torn, and blood was dripping from a cut above her eyebrow. But she didn't stop to check the wound. She didn't have time. The enemy was coming, and her passengers were still alive. Through the smoke, Sarah spotted them. 5 men in black, rifles in hand, walking slowly like wolves who had already tasted blood. They were not afraid, not in a hurry. They thought the job was already done. She knew this kind of silence, the kind that came right before death. And yet she didn't freeze. Her ambulance was tilted on its side. One wheel still spinning slowly. The radio inside was smashed. The front glass cracked like a spiderweb. Her med kit had flown out during the blast, its contents scattered across the sand. But she didn't need bandages right now. She needed a miracle. Or at least a plan. Sarah crouched low behind the wreckage, her breath shallow. She peeked toward the rocks, and there, movement, the injured soldiers, barely crawling, trying to stay hidden. One of them was dragging his leg. The other had a bloody cloth wrapped around his stomach. They were trying to survive, but without help they wouldn't last long. She looked down and saw something half buried in the sand, a fallen soldier's pack. With shaking fingers, she opened it. A handgun, half a bottle of water, a flare, and a folding knife. Not much, but enough to start something. She had never used a gun in combat, but she had trained once, long ago, before she gave up the path of violence. The gun felt strange in her hand. Cold, heavy, not like the soft rubber steering wheel she was used to. But she gripped it anyway, pressing her back against the metal door. Her mind was calm, almost too calm, as if her body remembered things her heart had tried to forget. She counted their steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were spreading out. Circling the wreck, checking for survivors, Sarah waited, silent still, a ghost in uniform. Then, when one of them got close enough, she moved, quick as lightning. She slammed the edge of the door into his knee, knocking him down before he could cry out. She hit him again, then pulled him behind the ambulance. She took his rifle and ammo, her breath sharp but steady. 1 down, 4 more. Sarah's eyes were fire now. Not afraid, not angry, just awake. For the first time in years, she felt completely alive. She crawled along the side of the wreck using the smoke as cover. She didn't run. She stalked like a hunter in the wild. Her movements were silent, smooth and precise. She didn't waste bullets, didn't shout, didn't panic, just aimed and fired when needed. 2 more enemies fell without even seeing her face. By the time the last 2 realized they were under attack, it was too late. Sarah moved through the smoke like a shadow, disappearing and reappearing. One tried to throw a grenade, but she hit him in the arm before he could pull the pin. The other turned to run, and she tackled him. Hard, slamming him into the sand. He reached for his weapon, but she kicked it away and knocked him out cold. Silence fell again, this time a different kind. The kind that comes after a storm. The desert held its breath as Sarah stood among the fallen men. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From the flood of adrenaline, she had done what no one expected. Not even herself. She didn't wait to celebrate. She ran toward the rocks where the wounded soldiers were still lying. One looked up, eyes wide. "Ma'am, is that you?" She nodded, pulling off her jacket to wrap the stomach wound tighter. "We have to move now," she whispered. More might be coming. She helped the one with the bad leg up first, supporting his weight with her own bruised body. Then she carried the second on her back, step by step, toward the remains of an old outpost half a mile away. Each step burned, each breath hurt, but she didn't stop, because she was not just the driver anymore. She was their only chance, and she was not going to fail. By the time they reached the outpost, the sun was setting. Shadows stretched across the sand, and the wind had picked up. Sarah dropped to her knees, exhausted, her arms trembling. But the 2 soldiers were alive, and that was all that mattered. Back at the main camp, no one knew what had happened yet, but something had changed forever in the desert that day. The woman they once called just the driver had become something else. Not because she wanted to fight, but because when no one else could, she did. The night fell slowly over the desert, covering everything in silence and dust. Sarah sat against a broken wall inside the old outpost, her breath heavy, her shoulder bleeding again. She tried to push away the pain, but her vision blurred every few minutes. The 2 wounded soldiers were lying nearby, half conscious but alive, whispering words of thanks she didn't want to hear. She looked at her hand. They were shaking now, blood mixed with sand under her nails. Her arms hurt, her back burned, and her throat was dry like paper. But inside her chest, something else was burning too. Something fierce and unstoppable. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pride. It was something she hadn't felt in years. It was the same fire she had once seen in her mother's eyes. When Sarah was a little girl, her mother had been a medic in the army too. She used to tell her, "Courage is not about fighting. It's about refusing to give up." Sarah had always admired that, until the day her mother came home in a coffin. After that, courage became a painful word. She had promised herself never to pick up a gun, never to fight, never to be like her, but tonight, she had done everything her mother once did. She had fought, she had saved lives, and she had crossed the line she swore she never would. The thought scared her, and yet somewhere deep inside it also felt right. She whispered softly to the stars above, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I had to." Her shoulder throbbed again, forcing her back into the present. She tore a piece of her sleeve and pressed it against the wound. No proper bandages left, no clean water, no radio. The only light came from a small flare she had found in a soldier's bag. Glowing dimly on the ground, the desert wind howled outside, making the broken metal rattle like chains. She needed to get help before sunrise. The injured men wouldn't last long without medical care. But the base was far. Too far to reach on foot with two wounded. She had to think, she had to plan. One of the soldiers groaned and opened his eyes. "Ma'am, are we safe?" he whispered. Sarah looked at him. Young, maybe 20, his face pale and lips dry. "For now," she said softly, "but we can't stay long." He nodded weakly before falling back asleep, his hand clutching the edge of her uniform like a child afraid of the dark. Sarah stood up slowly, every bone in her body protesting. She walked outside the broken wall and looked toward the dark horizon. Far away, flashes of light blinked in the distance. Gunfire. The enemy was still out there, searching, maybe regrouping. They would come back at sunrise. And if she stayed here, all of them would die. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her heartbeat slowed, her mind clearing the noise. Years of training she thought she'd forgotten began to return. Her body remembered the drills, the movements, the silence of combat. Back in training, before she became a medic, she had once been top of her class in tactical awareness. She had quit after her brother died in an accident during that same course. But the knowledge, the instinct had never truly left her. Sarah walked back to the soldiers, her voice calm. "Listen," she said quietly. "When the sun rises, they'll come, and we'll be ready." Even half-conscious, the men listened, because there was something in her tone, a strength that didn't sound like a medic's voice. It sounded like a leader's. She began preparing for what little defense they could manage. She dragged old crates to block the entrance. She took the enemy rifles she had collected and checked the magazines. Only a few bullets left, but she'd make everyone count. She placed the flare carefully at the far side of the outpost. A decoy light if anyone came from that direction. She would know. Hours passed slowly. The night grew colder, and Sarah sat with her back against the wall, staring into the darkness. Every sound made her muscles tighten. The rustle of wind, the creak of metal, the distant cry of a bird. But she stayed still, her hands on the rifle, eyes sharp. She was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest, and then, just before dawn, she heard it, soft footsteps in the sand. Her grip tightened through the dim light. She saw shadows moving, maybe 2, maybe 3. She couldn't tell. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She raised her weapon slowly and whispered to herself, "Not today." When the first light of morning touched the desert, Sarah was still awake, her eyes were red, her lips cracked, but she stood tall. Behind her, the soldiers were still breathing, alive because of her. She didn't know what the next hour would bring, but she was ready, whatever she had become, soldier, medic, fighter. It didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping them alive. She looked at the horizon and whispered, "If you're coming, then come," because the quiet driver with the steady hands was gone now. What remained was something else, something unbreakable, a hidden fire that had finally come alive in the middle of the desert. The sky turned gray as the first rays of morning crawled over the desert sand. Sarah crouched low behind the broken wall, her eyes locked on the shadows that moved across the open ground. They weren't friendly, 3 figures in dark clothes carrying rifles, creeping closer with each breath. She could tell from their movement. Slow, careful, like they were hunting something. But they didn't know they weren't the hunters this time. Sarah's muscles ached. Her shoulders screamed with every small movement, but her mind was sharp, her heartbeat slow. She remembered her training, how to breathe through fear, how to move without sound, and now She wasn't just remembering it, she was living it. The flare she had planted flickered in the far corner of the outpost. It caught the attention of the approaching men. 2 of them turned their heads. Watching the light, they thought the survivors might be hiding over there. It was working, her trap, her trick, her plan. She waited, breath held, until they moved a little farther away from the entrance. Then, like a whisper in the wind, she moved, low, quiet, fast. The same woman who used to drive through gunfire without blinking now stepped like a shadow. She circled to the side, staying low behind rocks and metal. One of the men stopped suddenly. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he sensed it, but it was too late. She struck hard and fast, jamming the rifle butt into the back of his knee. He dropped to the ground with a grunt, his weapon slipping from his hands before he could cry out. Sarah wrapped her arm around his neck and pulled tight. He fought, kicked, gasped, but within seconds he went still. She laid him down gently and picked up his weapon. 2 more, she thought. They were still searching near the decoy flare. Backs half turned, rifles loose in their hands. They weren't expecting someone like her. To them, she was just a medic, just a driver. But they didn't know what she had been before she chose peace. She aimed the rifle. Steady hands once made for steering, now set for survival. 1 breath in, hold, release. She fired. The shot echoed across the sand and 1 man fell. The last enemy turned, shocked, panicked, firing wildly in the wrong direction. Sarah ducked, moved right, using the smoke and debris to vanish. He called out, angry, confused. She didn't answer. She moved like water, silent, flowing. Bending through the broken outpost, then she appeared behind him. Not making a sound, before he could turn, she kicked his legs out from under him and pinned him to the ground. He struggled, tried to grab his weapon. She kicked it away and held her blade to his throat. He froze, eyes wide with fear. Sarah leaned closer and said one thing. "Leave your friends," she whispered, "and tell your people we're not afraid." She let him go, and he ran like a shadow swallowed by dawn. She stood in the middle of the sand, watching him disappear over the ridge. Then slowly, she returned to the outpost. Her body was shaking now, the adrenaline fading, the pain catching up. But her mission wasn't over yet. The soldiers were still alive, still waiting. They looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time. "Ma'am," one whispered, "what are you?" Sarah sat down beside him, wiped the sweat from her face and smiled faintly. "Still just the driver," she said, "but a little angry today." She used the stolen supplies to clean their wounds. She poured the last of the water between them, making sure each got a sip. Her own shoulder was bleeding again, the fabric soaked through, but she didn't care. They were alive. That was her only goal. She gave the younger soldier a rifle, showed him how to hold it. "If anything happens before help comes, you shoot once in the air. Then hide," she said. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask if she could protect them again. He knew she would. Hours passed, the sun grew hotter, and Sarah didn't sleep. She stayed near the edge of the outpost, eyes always scanning the desert. She had no more plans, no more tricks. But she had something else, a fire inside her that burned stronger than fear. When the rescue team finally arrived that afternoon, 5 trucks, 2 choppers, and a full squad, they expected to find dead bodies. Instead, they found Sarah standing tall, blood on her face, rifle in hand, and 2 wounded soldiers sitting up and alive. The team leader stared at her. "You held this place alone?" he asked, stunned. She shrugged and said, "I didn't have a choice." The helicopters landed with a thunder that shook the sand. Dust clouds rose high and soldiers jumped out shouting, scanning the area with weapons ready. They expected to find broken bodies, maybe just an empty wreck. But what they found instead left them frozen. Sarah stood near the edge of the outpost wall, rifle in hand, uniform torn and bloodied. 2 wounded soldiers sat behind her, one holding onto her arm like a lifeline. She didn't look like a driver anymore. She looked like someone who had faced the desert, and won. The commander stepped forward, stunned. "You held them off." "Alone?" he asked. Sarah gave a tired nod, her voice quiet. "They were going to die if I didn't." He looked at her shoulder, the soaked fabric sticking to her skin. "You're bleeding," he said. "I know," she replied and sat down slowly, as if only now her body remembered it was in pain. Medics rushed in to treat the injured, and someone helped Sarah lie back, but she kept her eyes open, watching until the last soldier was safe inside the rescue truck. Only then did she allow herself to close her eyes. Back at base, word spread like fire. People whispered her name like it belonged to a legend. The medic who fought back, they said. The driver who moved like a commando. But Sarah didn't want praise. She just wanted sleep. She lay in the medical tent, arm bandaged, shoulder stitched, trying to forget the images still flashing behind her eyelids. The blast, the crawling men, the rifle in her hands. It played again and again. But what echoed most was the moment after the fight, the quiet between the heartbeats. When she realized she had changed, the next day, the soldiers she had saved came to see her. One limped on crutches. The other had fresh stitches across his side. Both stood awkwardly near her bed. Unsure how to begin, ma'am, one finally said. You didn't just save us, you fought for us. She smiled faintly. I just did what needed to be done. But he shook his head. That's what brothers do. The word hit something inside her. Brother. Her breath caught in her throat and her smile faded. Memories came crashing down. Her own brother, the one she had lost in training. The one she had promised she would never follow into war. Sarah turned her head, blinking back tears. I used to have a brother too, she whispered. He died in a training accident. I blamed the army, I blamed myself. The two men sat beside her, listening in silence. And now I feel like I'm becoming him, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't want this life, one of them. The younger one reached for her hand. Maybe you didn't want it, he said. But it wanted you. You didn't choose war, ma'am, but when it came for you, you stood tall. Sarah stared at the ceiling, letting his words sink in like slow rain. Later that evening, she sat by herself near the back of the base. The sky was soft orange and the air smelled like metal and dust. She looked at her hands, still rough, still shaking a little, but not because of fear. Because of something else, on something new. A quiet voice called from behind her. It was Sergeant Coleman, an older man who had been in many wars. He sat next to her without saying anything for a long while. Finally he spoke. You know, he said, some people fight to prove something, some fight because they're angry. But some fight because they just can't let others die. I think you're that kind. Sarah nodded slowly. I never thought I had it in me, she admitted. He looked at her with calm eyes. You didn't find it out there in the sand, he said. It was already inside you waiting. That night, the base mess hall was louder than usual. But when Sarah walked in, the room fell quiet. Not out of fear, but respect. Soldiers stood up, offering her a place at their table. Someone clapped softly, and then the whole room joined. Sarah looked around, faces young and old. Men and women who had only known her as the driver. Now, they saw her as something more. Not a hero, not a commando, but a symbol of strength, of sacrifice, of what happens when someone refuses to give up. As she sat among them, she didn't feel alone anymore. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged, not just behind the wheel, but beside the people she once thought she'd never be like. In Blood and Sand, she had found something she lost long ago, a new kind of family and a truth that would stay with her forever, that sometimes, brotherhood isn't only about who you're born with sometimes. It's about who you choose to stand beside when the bullets fly. 3 days after the ambush, Sarah sat in a quiet office. Her arm was in a sling, her shoulder still sore. But the swelling had gone down. The walls around her were plain, no pictures, no sound. Just a ticking clock and a sharp smell of paper and ink. Across the desk sat a major she had never seen before. His uniform stiff and clean. A recorder blinked red between them. Silently listening to every breath, Sarah wasn't nervous. But she was tired of questions, of attention, of being treated like a mystery. All right, Sergeant Sarah Monroe, the officer began, looking at a file in his hands. You're a non-combat medic assigned to Vehicle Unit 19, correct? Yes, she answered, voice flat. Yet 3 days ago, you engaged and neutralized multiple armed enemies, he said. Raising one eyebrow, Sarah said nothing. You used advanced movement, weapon disarm techniques. Tactical distractions, he continued, tapping the folder. He leaned forward. Where did you learn to fight like that? Sarah looked down at her hands. They were clean now, but she could still see the dust and blood on them. I didn't plan it, she said. I just did what I had to do. The officer didn't look satisfied. We ran your background, he said, sliding a file across the desk. You enrolled in elite combat medic training 5 years ago. Top scores in close quarters combat. Sharpshooting, stealth movement. But you withdrew 3 weeks before final evaluation? He paused, watching her face. Why? Sarah's eyes grew still. She hadn't spoken about that day in years. It was my brother, she said quietly. He died during a night drill. Faulty equipment. Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. I blamed myself. I was the one who told him to join. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. I left the program, became just a driver, she added. I wanted to stay far away from anything that reminded me of him. The officer leaned back, folding his arms. And yet, when the bullets flew, you didn't run, he said. You moved like someone trained to kill. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't like the word kill. That wasn't why she fought. She fought so others could live. Look, the officer sighed, softening his tone. You broke no rules, saved lives, and prevented an enemy scouting party from reaching our base. But this has people upstairs asking questions. They want to know if you're hiding something? Sarah shook her head. I'm not hiding, she said firmly. I just wanted to be left alone. He nodded slowly, tapping the recorder to stop it. Then why do you think you reacted like that? He asked. Most medics freeze or hide. Or pray. Sarah thought for a long moment, then answered. Because I saw 2 men crawling through the sand, she said. And I knew no one else was coming. And I couldn't let them die. The officer didn't speak for a while. Then he smiled, not wide but real. You're not a soldier, he said. You're a protector. And that scares some people more than a fighter. Later that afternoon, Sarah stepped outside the office. The sun was sharp, and soldiers passed by, some saluting, some just nodding with quiet respect. She didn't like being in the spotlight, but she understood now. This story wasn't going away. That evening she was called to the commander's tent. Inside was General Whitmore, a woman known for her steel gaze and calm voice. I read the report, the general said, gesturing for Sarah to sit. And I want to offer you something, Sarah blinked. A punishment? Whitmore laughed softly. No, she said. A position. We want you to lead tactical field readiness for medics, she said. Train them to think like soldiers when everything goes wrong. Sarah hesitated. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, she said. The general leaned in. You're exactly the right person, she said. Because you didn't fight to win, you fought to protect. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. The base had returned to normal, trucks rolling, radios humming, boots marching. But inside her, something was changing again. The woman who once ran from the battlefield was being asked to return. Not to fight, but to teach, not to carry a gun, but to prepare others to carry courage. She thought about her brother, his goofy smile. The way he used to call her Sarge just to tease her. He would have laughed if he saw her now. Then he'd be proud, she whispered to the dark sky above. I didn't want this life, she said, but maybe it wanted me. And for the first time, she didn't feel guilt, she felt purpose. Not just behind the wheel, but standing in front of others, ready to show them how to survive. Not with violence, but with heart, because sometimes the strongest fighter is the one who steps forward when no one else will. The days moved slower after the investigation ended. Sarah was cleared, praised, and even offered a new role. But the inside of her heart still felt heavy, like a bag full of unspoken memories. She walked through the base like a shadow, respected, saluted, yet always alone. Some nights she sat by the back fence near the wire gates. Watching the stars, she didn't speak much anymore. Even after everything, the battle, the rescue, the attention, something inside her still felt unfinished. Like a door had opened, but no one had stepped through. Then one afternoon, a young soldier came running into the medical tent where Sarah was sorting supplies. Ma'am, he said, holding out a small brown envelope. This just came for you. Sarah looked at the envelope and paused. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in careful handwriting. She took it slowly, like it might break in her hands. She sat down on the edge of the cot and opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. She unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear Sergeant Monroe, my name is Lily Carr. I'm the wife of Corporal Devon Carr, one of the 2 soldiers you saved during the ambush near Black Alley. I don't know how to say this, but thank you doesn't feel big enough. You didn't just save my husband's life. You saved our family. Devon is a father to 2 little girls, ages 4 and 6. I told them their daddy was very brave, but also that a kind woman with fire in her heart brought him home. I heard what you did, what you risked, Devin told me everything and I cried for hours. Not just because I was scared, but because I realized what true courage looks like. Please know that you didn't just carry a soldier to safety. You carried a father back to his daughters, and that will live in our hearts forever. With all the love in the world, Lily Carr. Sarah stopped reading. Her fingers trembling, the tent felt quiet. As if time had paused just for her, her chest tightened. And for the first time since the rescue, tears came. Not from fear, not from pain, but from something softer. She pressed the letter to her heart and closed her eyes. The image of two little girls waiting for their father played in her mind. She had saved lives before, yes, but this time, she had saved a future, birthdays, hugs, bedtime stories, and first days of school, all because she didn't run later that evening. Sarah walked to the edge of the base with the letter still in her pocket. She looked out at the desert, the same desert where she had fought, bled, and changed. She whispered softly, "You mattered, Sarah." For the first time, she said her name to herself like it was something sacred, not a name lost in shadows, but a name that had weight. When she returned to her bunk, she pulled out an old photo from her belongings, her and her brother in uniform, both smiling. She placed the letter beside it and stared for a long moment. "I thought I failed you," she whispered to the photo, "but maybe I didn't." The next morning, Sarah requested a new assignment. She didn't want medals or interviews. She didn't want her story told in big speeches or news headlines. She just wanted to teach, to pass on the fire without the noise. She began training new medics, not just in bandages and stretchers, but in what to do when everything goes wrong. She taught them how to move when fear takes over, how to listen to instinct, how to protect even when you're not a fighter. Most of all, she taught them that courage is quiet, and sometimes it wears a soft voice and a dusty uniform. Her classes grew quickly. Young recruits looked up to her, listened closely. They called her Sarge, a nickname she never asked for, but never rejected either, because now it meant something different. She kept Lily's letter in her vest pocket every day, folded gently like a prayer when a recruit asked her once, "Ma'am, why do you do this?" She smiled and replied, "Because someone's waiting at home for each of you." And in that answer, she found her own peace. Sarah didn't need to go back into combat again. Her war was over, not the one fought with bullets, but the one inside her heart. And this time she had won. The base looked the same. Same sand-covered roads, same distant gunfire, same helicopters flying overhead like giant insects. But for Sarah, everything had changed. She wasn't behind the wheel anymore. She was standing in front of a group of fresh recruits, young, nervous, unsure, just like she had once been. "All right," she said, her voice calm but steady. "Rule number 1, never assume you're safe just because you're the medic." A few recruits exchanged glances. "You're not just here to heal bodies," she continued. "You're here to protect souls." She walked slowly in front of them, her uniform clean but faded from the sun. Some still whispered about her when they saw her. The driver who fought back, the medic who moved like a seal. But Sarah never corrected them. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She knew who she was. She was someone who had driven into chaos with no weapon, someone who had carried lives on her back, someone who had stood up when others would have hidden. And now she was someone who would prepare the next ones. Each morning she led her unit through drills, not just how to stop bleeding or insert IVs, but how to stay calm under fire, how to move fast when the world slows down, how to think like soldiers. Even if their hands only carried bandages, some found it hard at first. One girl cried during her first night simulation. The fake gunfire too real. The pressure too heavy. Sarah didn't yell at her. She sat beside her and said, "I cried my first time too, but I still got back up." Those words stuck because when Sarah spoke, it wasn't from a book, it was from experience, from blood and dust, and a desert she would never forget. Later that week, Sarah received a small package from the main office. Inside was a framed certificate, a medal of bravery, and a letter from the general. "You showed what leadership looks like when no one is watching," the letter said. Sarah looked at the medal for a long time, then quietly placed it in her drawer, not because she didn't value it, but because she believed real honor lives in the heart, not on the chest. She kept something else closer instead, the letter from Lily Carr. It stayed in her vest pocket every day, sometimes during long marches, when her legs ached and her shoulder pulsed. She'd touch it gently, and she would remember why she kept going. One night, after a long training session, a young soldier named Malik approached her. He looked nervous, scratching his neck as he spoke. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thanks." Sarah tilted her head. "For what?" "For not making us feel like we're just medics," he said. "You make us feel like warriors," Sarah smiled. The kind of smile that grows slowly from deep within. "You are warriors," she said. "You just fight with heart instead of hate." Weeks turned into months, and her unit grew stronger. They trained hard, laughed harder, and learned what it meant to carry others through the fire. Some would go to safe zones, some to battlefields, but all of them would carry a part of Sarah's story inside them. A story that began with silence and ended in strength. One evening, Sarah stood alone on a hill overlooking the camp. The sun was setting in golden fire, the sky painted like a memory. She held her brother's photo in one hand, the letter in the other. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. "I'm still scared sometimes, but I'm not hiding." The wind picked up, brushing through her hair like an old friend. In that moment, she felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she had found her place. She wasn't just a driver. She wasn't just a medic. She was a protector, a teacher, a flame passed from hand to hand. And in every heartbeat of every soldier she trained, she lived on. When people asked her later, "How did you do it?" she would smile and say, "I just kept going forward, because sometimes that's the bravest thing anyone can do." And when those same recruits found themselves one day surrounded by fear, they would remember her voice, steady and calm, and they would whisper back, "I'm not just a medic anymore.